My grandfather is 98 years old. Not long ago, he pulled through a nasty illness that we all thought would be the end of him. The family was thrilled, and we started planning a party to celebrate his recovery. But the day after Grandpa came home from the hospital, my uncle's son collapsed, falling into a strange, wasting sickness that left him clinging to life. People in town started whispering. They said Grandpa had stolen his years. Of course, my family dismissed it as ridiculous gossip. After all, Kayla was Grandpa's favorite grandchild. But then I remembered something. 15 years ago, when Grandpa was 83, my Uncle David died, the very same day Grandpa recovered from a similar near-fatal illness. Around here, there's always been an old folk tale about siphoning years. The old-timers used to believe that a person's lifespan wasn't fixed, that you could borrow or even take it through certain means. The easiest way, the stories went, was to use some strange ritual to take it from your own children or grandchildren. Some old men would kneel to their grandsons, even call them Grandpa. Others would secretly collect their descendants' fingernail clippings, grind them into a powder to drink, or steep them in their bathwater. It's the 21st century now, and nobody pays that superstitious nonsense any mind. But this time, I don't know who started the rumors, and the timing was just too perfect. My Uncle Rick and his family bought into it completely. That night, they stormed over to our house to raise hell. That old bastard better give me an answer today, or I'm not leaving. Uncle Rick, my dad's younger brother, sat slumped in our living room armchair, his eyes bloodshot and wild. His wife, my Aunt Brenda, stood beside him with her hair a mess, wailing at the top of her lungs. "Dad, please come out and say something. We've always been so good to you. You can't do this to our Caleb, right?" I had to stop myself from laughing out loud. When they divided up the family responsibilities years ago, the deal was that each of the sons would take care of Grandpa for 6 months out of the year. But whenever it was Uncle Rick's turn, he was always too busy with work or had to go out of town. Before a month was up, Grandpa would be dropped back on our doorstep. One winter, someone saw them make Grandpa sit out on the porch by himself, gnawing on a cold, stale piece of bread. Yeah, real devoted. My dad frowned. "Ethan, go shut the door. Don't need the whole town watching this circus." I met the prying eyes of our neighbors as I closed the front door, then leaned against it, watching my aunt and uncle's little performance. Dad stubbed out his cigarette. "Rick, Brenda, you two should go home for tonight. It's 2024, for God's sake. Don't listen to that garbage people are saying." "Cut the crap, Rob." Uncle Rick slammed his hand on the coffee table, making everything jump. "Where is he? Where's the old man? I'll find him myself." I took one quick step and blocked his path. "Uncle Rick," I said, my voice calm, "Grandpa's asleep. You should go home. I hit the gym regularly, and I've got a good head of height on him. Standing in front of him, I probably looked like a brick wall. He shoved me a couple of times, but didn't budge me an inch. He stumbled back, looking up at me. "What, you want to throw hands, nephew?" I didn't move, just repeated myself. "Grandpa's asleep." "Nice kid you raised, Rob." Humiliated by being stood down by someone a generation younger, Rick glared at my dad, trying to get him to step in. Just a minute ago it was Rob, now it's his big brother again. My dad said nothing, just quietly lit another cigarette. "Fine. Fine. Let's see if you can keep that old parasite hidden away forever." After another 10 minutes of yelling and getting nowhere, they finally gave up. On his way out, Uncle Rick turned, his eyes full of venom. "You know, David was perfectly fine before he dropped dead. That old man stole his time, I know it. You're just standing by now, but don't come crying to me when he starts siphoning years from your own son." I saw my dad flinch. He watched them go, then waved a tired hand at me, telling me to go check on Grandpa. What Uncle Rick said at the end shook me, too. Grandpa had 3 sons. Uncle David was the first to go. It had been about 15 years. I was away at college at the time. I was asleep in my dorm room when Dad called, telling me Grandpa had a massive heart attack and wasn't going to make it. I had to come home immediately to say goodbye. When I burst into the hospital room the next day, I found Grandpa sitting up in bed, calmly eating a bowl of oatmeal. The whole family was there, except for those who lived too far away to make it back in time. And one other person was missing, Uncle David, who had always been the most devoted son. My grandma died young, so Grandpa raised his 3 boys on his own. David, being the oldest, understood his father's struggles better than anyone. He'd get worked up if Grandpa so much as skipped a meal. For him to be absent now, at a moment like this, made no sense. My dad pulled me aside and gave me the other terrible news. Uncle David had gotten into a car crash on his way to the hospital the night before. He died instantly. They were all hiding it from Grandpa, afraid the shock would kill him. After Grandpa was discharged, he kept asking where his eldest son was. It was a long time before they finally told him the truth. He locked himself in his room and didn't come out for a full day. At the time, nobody thought much of it. It was just a tragic coincidence. But hearing Uncle Rick bring it up now, a thought sparked in my mind. Grandpa was 83 then, wasn't he? There's an old country saying around here that 73 and 83 are the devil's milestones, the hardest years for a man to pass. A lot of old men in our town never made it past those ages. But Grandpa not only sailed through both, he's 98 now and still takes a walk by himself every day. Besides his eyes and teeth getting a little worn, he's solid as a rock. Could it be possible? Did Grandpa really take Uncle David's time? A shiver went down my spine. I immediately felt stupid. I'm a college-educated man, for crying out loud. A man in his 30s believing in this stuff. When I entered his room, Grandpa sat up in bed, his face lighting up. "Ethan boy, I heard your Uncle Rick just now. Where is he? Is he here to take me home with him?" I looked at the deep canyons on his old face and just shook my head. They had to leave. Something came up. Left. They left. The light in his eyes flickered and died. "Well," he mumbled, "he's a busy man. I'm sure he'll come get me when he has time." In families with a lot of kids, parents always seem to have high hopes for the oldest and a soft spot for the youngest. It's the one in the middle who gets all the responsibility and none of the affection. Even after the way Uncle Rick's family treated him, Grandpa could always find an excuse for them. It was the same when they were settling his affairs. After Uncle David passed, his daughter took his widow and moved to the city, and they rarely came back. So Grandpa signed over the big 3-bedroom family house and all his savings to Uncle Rick. All my dad got was a drafty, leaking shack. If my dad hadn't been so sharp and hardworking, and if I hadn't done well for myself, we'd never have the comfortable life we have now. Uncle Rick, on the other hand, was all ambition and no action. He took Grandpa's money and blew it on one failed business scheme after another, all while looking down his nose at us. He was always talking about, "When I strike it rich, I'm gonna..." None of it ever panned out. The money just vanished. Then he married Aunt Brenda, who was just as arrogant, and they raised a son who was even worse. Now, the three of them still live in that old brick house, a relic surrounded by the newer, nicer homes in the neighborhood, still dreaming of one day living in some McMansion. But no matter how badly they failed, they could talk a good game. They had the old man wrapped around their little finger, and he'd gladly hand over his retirement checks. Some people, I swear, just like to be fooled. After a short silence, Grandpa asked anxiously, "By the way, Ethan boy, how's my dear grandson?" In this family, the only one who qualified for that title was, of course, Uncle Rick's son, Caleb. I felt a sour taste in my mouth, but I tried to sound reassuring. "Caleb's still in the hospital. Don't worry, Grandpa. Modern medicine is amazing. He'll be fine. You're not worried, of course." Grandpa's voice suddenly rose, his old eyes glaring, before he sighed. "A mistake. It was all a mistake." I couldn't help but ask, what was a mistake? He turned his head away, his eyes darting around nervously. "And nothing. Just, it should have been you two who switched places. You're strong. You could have handled it. My precious grandson is so fragile. How can he bear it?" A chill shot through me. I turned and left the room. "You should get some sleep, Grandpa." Standing outside, I looked at his shadow on the window shade. He had his hands clasped together, praying to something I couldn't see. 3. The next morning, Dad asked me to go to the hospital to check on my cousin. He said we were family, and you can't break that bond. To make sure Uncle Rick didn't do anything stupid, Dad decided to stay home and keep an eye on things. I didn't want to go, but I went anyway. The hospital smelled of antiseptic. After asking at the front desk, I found Caleb's private room. "Are you a complete moron? You can't even do a simple thing like that. I want to speak to your supervisor." "Get out." I heard Caleb's furious shouting from down the hall. A second later, a young nurse with red-rimmed eyes rushed out of the room. I hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open. Caleb was alone in the room. I was shocked when I saw him. It had only been 2 or 3 days, but Caleb, who used to be a solid 250 pounds, looked like he'd lost half his body weight. His face was pale, his hair was dry and brittle, and his eyes were cloudy. He looked like he'd aged a decade. I told you to get. Ethan Hayes, you've got a lot of nerve showing your face here. Caleb had been lying in bed. He started yelling the moment he heard the door open, but when he saw it was me, his face twisted with rage. If he hadn't been hooked up to an 4, I'm pretty sure he would have tried to attack me. Uncle Rick had him late in life and spoiled him rotten. Caleb had zero respect for any of his elders. He was a petty thief as a kid and got caught peeping on a female classmate in middle school. He was almost expelled. Still, we'd never been at the point where he wanted to physically fight me. I was completely baffled. Caleb, I just came to see how you were doing. He gritted his teeth, his voice dripping with resentment. To gloat? To see if I'm dead yet. My dad told me everything. You and your dad cooked this whole thing up with that old leech to steal my life. I stared at him, speechless. Huh, cat got your tongue. He looked triumphant, like he'd uncovered a grand conspiracy. You just wait. What you took from me, I'm going to take it all back one day. The way he looked at me made my blood run cold. I put down the basket of fruit I'd brought and was about to leave when my phone rang. It was my buddy from back home. A wave of dread washed over me. Ethan, man, you got to get back here. There's trouble at your house. We've been so careful, but it happened anyway. My friend's voice was so loud that Caleb heard it from his bed. His face contorted into a grin that was both ecstatic and insane. Payback. Payback's a bitch. You steal my time, and now you're all going to die. I didn't have time for him. I dropped the fruit and bolted for the door. Even from down the hall, I could still hear his unhinged laughter. I floored it the whole way home, nearly causing an accident. The usual hour-long drive took me 40 minutes. Ethan, what are you doing back? Dad met me as I got out of the car. He had a towel pressed to his head, stained with blood. The front yard was a complete mess. My face darkened. Who did this? Dad looked exhausted, shaking his head. It's nothing. I just bumped my head. My friend, who was still there, chimed in. Ethan, not long after you left this morning, your Uncle Rick showed up with a couple of his buddies. They were trying to take your grandpa. Your dad wouldn't let them. They argued. And then things got physical. So that's why they weren't at the hospital. Rage burned in my chest. I fought to keep my voice steady. Where are they now? Dad shook his head again. They're gone. Don't do anything stupid, Ethan. Your grandpa's fine. That's all that matters. Where's Grandpa? He's been in his room the whole time. Hasn't come out. A jolt of alarm went through me. Uncle Rick came here to start a fight. The commotion must have been huge. Grandpa was always hoping Rick would come for him. Why wouldn't he have come out? I sprinted toward the small cottage in the backyard where Grandpa lived. Dad followed, right behind me. Sure enough, Grandpa was gone. Dad panicked and immediately started searching the property. But I, guided by some strange impulse, stayed behind. A highly improbable event happening once can be a coincidence. If it happens twice, both times in your own family, it's hard not to be suspicious. I searched Grandpa's room, turning everything over, but found nothing. I let out a sigh of relief. I must have been overthinking it. As I was about to leave, the corner of my eye caught something. One of the legs of Grandpa's nightstand seemed slightly higher than the others. The floorboard beneath it was loose. A voice in my head, a quiet and insistent whisper, urged me on. Something's wrong with that spot. I moved the nightstand and pried up the loose floorboard. A neatly folded red paper packet lay in the small hollow beneath. 3 words were written on it in black ink. Caleb Hayes. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. Inside was a small pile of clipped fingernails. The world went dark around me. My head spun, and I nearly collapsed. Grandpa, he was really doing it. He was stealing my cousin's life. Ethan boy, what are you doing? A raspy, ancient voice spoke right behind me. I whipped around. My scalp went numb. It was Grandpa. He was standing less than 2 feet away, staring at me with those cloudy, old eyes. His gaze was ice cold, for the man before me was stooped and frail. He looked like he had 1 foot in the grave, yet he sent a chill deep into my bones. Thinking back to what Uncle Rick had said, the coldness seeped into my marrow. Whatever the truth was, I had to get it out of him today. I held out my open palm. Grandpa, I asked, what is this? You were always the sharp one, son. I knew I couldn't hide it from you forever. Grandpa turned, shut the door, and walked slowly toward me. My dear grandson, everything I've done for you. I'd lived my whole life and never once heard him call me his dear grandson. I froze, thinking I must have misheard him. You're saying, you took my Uncle David's years, and now you're taking Caleb's, and this is somehow for my benefit. Did he think I'd bulked up my muscles at the expense of my brain? Grandpa took the red packet from my hand, his dry, thin fingers caressing the paper. All these years, you and your father have thought I favored Rick's family, haven't you? I said nothing. Anyone with eyes could see that. It wasn't just something we thought. And you think I'm doing this because I'm afraid of dying? I remained silent. He continued on his own. They say having an old person in the house is like having a treasure. But not every old person is a treasure. Some old folks, the longer they live, the more their children and grandchildren prosper. But others, the longer they live, the more they become a curse. Grandpa looked up at me. My dear grandson, you don't really believe that all the good fortune your family has had is just because you and your father are hard workers, do you? My mind reeled. Scenes from the past flashed through my head. Years ago, after we'd moved into the shack, Dad followed the lead of others in town and started a small poultry farm. In the beginning, he had no experience, lost a lot of money, and racked up a mountain of debt. But right around the time Grandpa came to live with us, everything started to turn around. When we had freak storms or outbreaks of avian flu, other farms would suffer huge losses, some even going bankrupt. And when you start doing well, you attract jealousy. People would try to sabotage your operation, but our farm always suffered minimal losses. No one ever gave us any real trouble. Over the years, we became the biggest poultry farmers in the county, leasing half the mountainside. Dad and I had always chalked it up to a bit of luck and a lot of hard work. Thinking about it now, it was an impossible amount of luck. Could it really be like Grandpa said? Was it because of his protection? No, wait. My eyes narrowed. Uncle Rick and Caleb are your family, too. How come their lives haven't gotten any better? How come they're the ones getting their years siphoned away? Grandpa sneered. You think I don't know who in this family treats me right and who doesn't? I may be old, but I'm not senile. When they were boys, I gave Rick everything, all the best things. I never thought that when I got old, all he'd care about was my retirement money. Rick is a thankless snake, and the son he raised is even worse. They're a menace to everyone around them. In this family, I decide who thrives and who fails. I decide who gets lucky and who gets screwed. The more he spoke, the more agitated he became, his white beard trembling. When I live at Rick's house, I take Caleb's years to transfer their family's fortune to yours. They owe me that, and they owe you. My thoughts were a tangled mess. But, Uncle David was so good to you. Why did you do that to him? At the mention of his eldest son, a flicker of sadness crossed Grandpa's face. I had no choice. Back then, none of you were doing well. If I just passed on, I couldn't have rested in peace. David only had a daughter. No matter how much fortune he had, it would all end up belonging to another family. Besides, he was never that healthy to begin with. Didn't seem like he was destined for a long life. Rather than let it go to waste, I figured it was better to keep it in the family. So I had Rick go to his house and get some of his fingernails. The more I listened, the more horrified I became. These were his own children, his own grandchildren. They were living, breathing people. I knew the truth now, but I was powerless. This man was my grandfather, and according to him, everything he'd done was for the good of my family. I couldn't bring myself to condemn him. Besides, even if I told someone, who would believe it? Apart from a few of the old-timers, everyone would think I was crazy. Siphoning years was just a story. My voice was hoarse. Grandpa, you can't do this kind of thing anymore. He chuckled, his smile suddenly looking kind and grandfatherly again. Don't worry, my dear grandson. This is the last time. This method isn't all-powerful, you know. Otherwise, I'd be some kind of monster. You borrow 5 years from someone, and you only get one for yourself. It's a bad trade, really. Willing to do this to your own flesh and blood. You're not much different from a monster already, I thought. I nodded, looking him in the eye. Grandpa, where were you just now? His expression was placid. I was out back using the outhouse. Sounded like there was a ruckus out front. What happened? Grandpa never got used to a modern toilet. So we built him an old-fashioned outhouse in the backyard, complete with handrails so he wouldn't fall. Uncle Rick came by with some guys. They tried to take you with them. Dad got hurt trying to stop them. That ungrateful brat. As he knows shame, Grandpa was furious. That's it. I'm never staying at his house again. Next time I see him, I'll give him a piece of my mind. I discreetly roll my eyes. Now that I knew the truth, I couldn't respect him the way I used to. The warmth I felt for him seemed to have vanished. Grandpa, you should rest. I'll go tell Dad you're back. He's still out looking for you. He grunted in acknowledgement, his hand clutching the red paper packet. Just as I reached the door, he spoke again. My dear grandson, it's not that I'm afraid of dying, but if you won't think about yourself, at least think of your 2 children. My feet froze. I fled from the cottage as if escaping a fire. That night, I lay in bed, tossing and turning. Grandpa's words echoed in my mind, refusing to leave. I had relied on my education to get out of this small town. Life was better now, but I never forgot the importance of good school. My son was in elementary school in the city. To give him the best education possible, I drained our savings to buy a house in a good school district and enroll him in a private academy. The mortgage, the tuition, the tutoring. It was a crushing financial burden. Now my wife was pregnant with our second. My mom was living with them in the city to help out. When a second baby arrived, the expenses would skyrocket. And when they grew up, they'd need houses, weddings. By this town's standards, we were well off. But in the city, we were barely keeping our heads above water. All these years of hard work had only managed to get my son to the same starting line as the kids who were born and raised in the city. The weight of it all was suffocating. If Grandpa died, if his protection disappeared, our farm could suffer the same fate as everyone else's. Our income would plummet. But if he lived longer, our family's fortune would continue to grow. I could expand, diversify into other businesses, not be tied to this farm forever. Then, an unbidden thought slid into my mind. My family and Uncle Rick's were already enemies. Given what kind of people they were, we would probably never speak again. Rick is a thankless snake, and the son he raised is even worse. They're a menace to everyone around them. Grandpa himself had said it, and he was the one doing the ritual. I could just pretend I didn't know anything. Better them than me. No matter how close they were as relatives, they weren't my wife and my children. Once the idea took root, it spread like a toxic weed. I was horrified at myself. I slapped my own face, hard, twice, trying to force myself to sleep. Outside, the stars blinked in the night sky, like a million watching eyes. Some seeds, once planted, will always find a way to sprout, no matter how deep you bury them. 6 after a month in the hospital, Caleb was finally discharged. Even with insurance, the remaining medical bills, now without Grandpa's financial support, were a devastating blow to Uncle Rick's already struggling family. I heard Rick try to get Aunt Brenda to sell some of her old gold jewelry. They had a massive fight over it that left his face covered in scratches. Caleb wasn't his old, arrogant self anymore. He seemed to have a permanent chill, wearing a heavy jacket even in the sweltering heat. He became withdrawn and sullen, and the way he looked at people was cold and menacing, like a snake coiled to strike. His family, unwilling to give up, came to our house a few more times, always trying to get money out of us. Having learned my lesson, I bought a few large, professionally trained German Shepherds and chained them up in the yard. They were fiercely protective and kept strangers at bay. After a few scares and without ever getting to see Grandpa, they finally stopped coming. Instead, they started spreading rumors around town that we were bad-mouthing them to Grandpa, that we had conspired with him to harm them, that the whole life-siphoning thing was our idea. It was laughable. Their reputation in town was so terrible that practically no one believed them. They just became the local joke. Time passed, and Thanksgiving was approaching. It was also Grandpa's 99th birthday. Dad, knowing nothing about my conversation with Grandpa, was determined to throw a big party to make the old man happy. He wanted to invite Uncle Rick, but I talked him out of it. I was taking on more of the family decisions these days, and he couldn't argue with my reasoning. It wasn't that I didn't want to bury the hatchet. It was because one night I'd had a persistent, uneasy feeling and decided to take a walk around the property. The only reason I went out was that Grandpa had come to me, telling me I should go check on the chicken coops. And there, I saw a shadow moving inside the brooder house. I crept closer and saw it was Caleb. He was holding a sack and pouring something into the water trough for the new batch of chicks. I didn't know what it was, but it was definitely poison. If he had succeeded, the consequences would have been catastrophic. If it weren't for the fact that we were family, Caleb would be in jail right now. But even after I let him go, he showed no remorse. He even threatened me, saying he'd be back. I was so furious, I slapped him across the face a few times right then and there. The next day, I bought more dogs. At the birthday party, aunts, uncles, and cousins who lived out of state all came back. We were all gathered in the backyard, grilling, drinking, and having a great time. Great Grandpa, I wish you a happy birthday and many more. My son held up a plastic cup of orange juice, toasting him with a serious expression that made everyone laugh. Oh, thank you, my little man. The wrinkles around Grandpa's eyes deepened as he smiled, patting my son's cheek fondly. Just as the party was in full swing, a few uninvited guests arrived. Well, now look at everyone having a grand old time. Uncle Rick's voice cut through the cheerful noise before we even saw him. I had put the dogs in their kennels for the party. He and his family cautiously scanned the yard before daring to step inside. My dad stood up, trying to be welcoming. Rick, you're here. Come on, find a seat. We can squeeze you in. Uncle Rick crossed his arms, a smirk on his face. My own father's birthday, and his son who lives right here in town can't even get an invitation. Isn't that something? Hilarious, truly hilarious. His sarcastic tone silenced the party. All eyes were on my dad and me. My dad beckoned him over. Rick, it's a celebration. Everyone's here. What are you talking about? Come on, sit down. He was still trying to appeal to his brother's sense of family, not realizing that to Rick, he was now the enemy. I'll pass on sitting. I'm afraid if I sit too long, my whole family's lifespan will get sucked away. Rick's eyes swept across the crowd, completely ignoring Grandpa's darkening expression. But hey, it's the old man's birthday. You all might not want me here, but as his son, I have to show my respects. I'm just here to drop off a gift, then I'll be on my way. Caleb, bring in your grandpa's present. Caleb gave a sinister smile and brought in a small box from outside, covered with a red cloth. Happy birthday, Grandpa. I wish you a long, long life. As he said the words, the mood soured. He ripped the cloth off, revealing a small, bronze funeral bell. Painted on its side in white was a single word: rest. Rick, what is the meaning of this? That's just wrong, completely out of line. What a disgrace to the family. An uproar of angry voices filled the yard. You animal. Grandpa was shaking with rage. He threw the golden laid cane his granddaughter had given him, a rattling sound coming from his throat. I rushed over to help him, patting his chest to calm him down. Oh dear, don't have a heart attack now, Aunt Brenda said, cracking sunflower seeds between her teeth with a smug look. I wonder if you dying would give my precious boy his years back. Get out. All of you get out. From this day on, I don't have a son named Rick. Grandpa stood up, his body trembling, his face a mask of disappointment, fury, and grief. Uncle Rick's face hardened. You think I care about being your son, you old parasite? I wish every last one of you would drop dead. The party was ruined. I stood on the driveway, watching them leave. I looked back at the heartbroken expressions on my father's and grandfather's faces, and my crying son, and my gaze turned to ice. I clenched and unclenched my fists. I couldn't do anything. I was afraid if I touched them, I'd beat them to death, and that would ruin my children's future. The moon hung high in the sky. My son was terrified by the fight, and it took my wife and me a long time to calm him down and get him to sleep. My dad, usually so resilient, was crushed. He sat alone in his room, chain smoking in the dark. I went downstairs and out to the backyard. A light was still on in Grandpa's cottage. Old people don't sleep much as it is. Tonight, he'd probably be up all night. My dear grandson, sit. Grandpa was leaning against his headboard. He wasn't surprised to see me, as if he'd been expecting me. His expression was calm, as if he had already recovered from the evening's rage. Grandpa, don't let what happened tonight get to you. He waved his hand. I'm too old to let things bother me for long. Those two animals will get what's coming to them. My dear grandson, they won't let this go. That family will keep making trouble for you. You can't be on guard forever. He patted the back of my hand, his voice low. You've always been the smart one. You know what I mean? Look at your fingernails, grandson. They're so long and dirty. Even an old man like me keeps himself cleaner than that. I'll get around to clipping them. Been too busy lately. I ignored the implication in his words and changed the subject. Grandpa, when you said our family has a special fortune protecting it, is that true? A smile spread across Grandpa's face. There are many things in this world that your so-called science can't explain. The concept of a family's fortune has been around forever. You can't feel it unless you reach a certain level. But as it is now, our fortune is strong enough to protect what we have. Taking the next step up will be difficult. I didn't understand what he meant by level, but the thought of not being able to advance was unacceptable. I hesitated, my mind a battlefield of conflict. A man has to be decisive, or he'll be paralyzed by doubt. If you want a better life for those two little ones, our two families' fortunes must be merged into one. Grandpa's face was stern, laying it all out in the open. I'm not afraid. So what are you afraid of? Let me be the one to bear the blame. No. I didn't. I need to think about it. Once again, I ran. In front of this withered old man. I always felt like a pawn on his chessboard. I admit it. I was being a hypocrite, wanting the reward without the guilt. The feeling was eating me alive. The next few days were filled with a dreary, constant rain. When the sun finally broke through, Dad called me out to the fields to help dig up the last of the peanuts. The peanut field was just on the other side of the backyard wall. As I worked my way along the wall, sweat dripping from my brow, my eyes fell on something unexpected. I froze, a dark cloud of dread settling over me. What's wrong, Ethan? My dad straightened up, noticing I had stopped. Nothing, just going back for a drink of water. I grabbed my pitchfork and walked back to the house. I saw Grandpa pacing in the living room, his hands behind his back. It was strange. Other than his daily walks, Grandpa almost never left his cottage. He rarely came into the main house. I need to talk to your father about something. Seeing me, Grandpa held up a few empty plastic bottles. You people have it too good now. These bottles, those cardboard boxes, you can get money for these. You just throw them away. If I hadn't come over today, I never would have known how wasteful you are. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. From his huffy tone, you'd think I'd committed a major crime. It's not like our family was hurting for the few cents we'd get from recycling. Dad's out back digging peanuts. Should I go get him? No need. I'll talk to him when he gets back. With that, Grandpa took the bottles and headed back to his cottage. I pulled out my phone and opened the Amazon app. Search. Add to cart. By now, the dark cloud in my heart grew heavier. After that night, I started visiting Grandpa's cottage more often, and I learned a lot. Whenever Grandpa was out, he'd tell everyone he met what a devoted grandson I was, and how he was finally able to live out his golden years in peace. And I never heard him mention Uncle Rick's name again, as if that son had ceased to exist. After our families became enemies, we rarely saw each other. When we did cross paths in town, Uncle Rick and his family would just glower at us, muttering curses under their breath. What goes around comes around. It was nothing more than the pathetic rage of losers. Living our own lives well was the best revenge. In a satisfying turn of events, Uncle Rick and Caleb were walking home one night when someone jumped them, threw sacks over their heads, and beat them bloody. They were left with several broken bones, passed out on the side of the road, and weren't found until morning. Aunt Brenda, left to care for two incapacitated men, complained nonstop and nearly filed for divorce. When Grandpa heard the news, he just frowned. He never mentioned visiting them. Instead, he told me it was a sign that the family fortune was shifting. By the time he turned 100, he said our family's fortune would reach a new peak, and it would protect us for at least another 10 years. Then, he could finally close his eyes in peace. 9. Grandpa wasn't lying. Winter turned to spring. My wife's belly grew bigger, and my new business venture was a resounding success. I bought another house in the city, renovated our old house in the country, and upgraded my car. I became the respected Mr. Hayes. I was living a life I had never dreamed of. Everything was going perfectly. However, just before Thanksgiving that year, Grandpa fell ill. With the years he'd siphoned from Caleb, he should have easily made it to 100. But that was assuming he stayed healthy. An old man's body is frail. At his age, even a common cold can be a death sentence. My dad was looking after him alone, juggling that with all his other responsibilities. It was inevitable that something would be overlooked. When I got the news, I panicked and rushed home. When I arrived, I sent my dad to get some rest. Grandpa held my hand, his voice a faint whisper. My dear grandson, I don't think I'm going to make it. I struggled to stay calm. Grandpa, don't talk like that. It's just a little bug. We made a deal, remember? You still have to meet your new great-grandchild. It's no use. Borrowed things are never stable, unless you keep borrowing. His expression was bleak as he shook his head. It's a shame. I couldn't make it to 100. My dear grandson, you'll have to be more careful from now on. I stared at the floor for a long moment. When I looked up, my eyes were bloodshot. Take mine. Nonsense. Grandpa's grip tightened on my hand as he immediately refused. My expression was resolute. It's not nonsense. I thought it all through. Grandpa, I'm still young. I got another 50, 60 years in me. I don't have any grand ambitions. All I want is for my wife and kids to have a good life. Seeing my determination, Grandpa was silent for a long time before letting out a heavy sigh. The things a man will do for his family. What a sin. I didn't care. We had to act quickly. We agreed on the plan. Tomorrow night, Grandpa would perform the ritual to siphon my years. The next night, I went to Grandpa's cottage with a small red packet. Inside were my fingernails for the ritual. Grandpa was sitting on his bed, his eyes closed in meditation. When he saw me, his expression became strangely excited, almost greedy, like an old hunter who has finally cornered his prey. Before I could process it, he spoke. Did you bring it? Yes. The moment I held it out, a sharp, blinding pain exploded at the back of my head. Then I was plunged into darkness. When I opened my eyes again, I was tied tightly to a chair. My mouth was gagged. My vision was blurry, and I could only make out shifting shapes. When my eyes finally focused, I was filled with shock and horror. Didn't see that coming, did you, dear nephew? Uncle Rick and Caleb were sitting across from me, smirking, and Grandpa was standing beside them, beaming with affection. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I would never have believed that just a short time ago, these people were wishing death upon each other. In that instant, I understood everything. Grandpa and Uncle Rick had been acting the whole time. It was all an elaborate charade. I stared at them, breathing heavily, struggling against my bonds, but it was no use. Figured it out? Getting angry? A little too late for that, isn't it? Caleb stood up, patted my cheek, and sneered. Do you have any idea what I've given up for this day? Do you know what my life has been like for the past 2 years? Tonight, you're going to feel the same pain. No, 10 times the pain. 100 times. Smack. He slapped me hard across the face, his eyes filled with sadistic glee. That's for looking down on me your whole life. Telling me to study hard, to be a good boy. Hypocrite. I hate people like you the most. Besides, why work hard when you can just take what's already there? What good is being book smart? You got to use your brain. If he wasn't afraid of waking the dogs in the front yard, I'm sure he would have been cackling like a madman. My face stung. I turned my head toward Grandpa, my eyes pleading, making muffled noises from behind the gag. If there was any part of him that still cared for me as his grandson, I might have a chance. But Grandpa didn't even flinch. My heart sank. Ethan boy, don't blame me. Years ago, if my precious Caleb hadn't offered up his own time, I would have been long gone. If you were in my shoes, would you have said no? This is my true grandson. Grandpa's gaze toward Caleb was filled with adoration. Rick's family has had it rough these past few years, but that was all for your family's benefit. Now, it's time to pay your debts. You've had your good fortune long enough. It's someone else's turn. As the head of this family, I have to keep things fair. Uncle Rick gave me a cold, dismissive glance. Dad, let's just get on with it. Make sure you take enough years from him. Don't kill him, though. That would just make things messy. Without my dear nephew here pulling the strings, his dad won't be a problem. I stopped struggling. I watched them, my face a mask of resignation. Rick and Caleb worked quickly, grinding the fingernails I had brought into a fine powder. Grandpa closed his eyes and began chanting over the small bowl of dust. Then he filled the bowl with water, grimaced, and drank it all down in one go. Here, Grandpa, wipe your mouth. Caleb obsequiously handed him a napkin. Such a thoughtful boy, my precious grandson. Grandpa's smile was wide and genuine. Watching this scene of family devotion, I felt sick to my stomach. Soon, the ritual took effect. Grandpa seemed revitalized. He got off the bed, stretched his limbs, and declared, "It's good to be alive. I feel so much better." Then, 2 horrified screams filled the room. Grandpa, what? What's happening to me? My hands. Dad, what's going on? Uncle Rick and Caleb collapsed to the floor, staring in terror at their reflections in the wardrobe mirror. The men in the mirror were undergoing a horrifying transformation. Wrinkles were appearing on Caleb's face in real time. His body shriveled, and in moments, he looked as old as my father. Uncle Rick's change was even more dramatic. His hair was turning white before our eyes. He and Grandpa now looked more like brothers than father and son. Their strength seemed to have been drained from them. They lay on the floor, unable to get up. And me? I was perfectly fine. Not a single thing had changed. Grandpa's eyes were wide with terror, his lips trembling. Ethan, boy, what? What did you do? Even tied up, an old man was no threat to me. I scooted my chair toward the table and used it to knock over the fruit knife. I've been tied up this whole time. What could I have done? I sliced through the ropes, picked up my phone, and opened the security camera app, holding the screen out for them to see. The footage showed two figures using a ladder to climb over my backyard wall. Once inside, they went into Grandpa's cottage. A few minutes later, they were climbing back over the wall and leaving. The two figures were, without a doubt, Uncle Rick and his son. The three of them stared at each other, their faces growing paler by the second. The camera feed switched to my living room. An elderly figure was rummaging through the trash can, searching for something. Every time they made a move, my dad and I were conveniently not at home. Looking for my fingernails, Grandpa, or my dad's? I put my phone away and looked down at them. 2 years of humiliation, from the depths of despair to a taste of paradise, and then back to hell again. The extreme whiplash, coupled with the pity in my eyes, was too much for Caleb. He was on the verge of a complete breakdown. No. Impossible, he shrieked. How could you have known? At first, I didn't. You almost had me completely fooled. A small smile played on my lips. I have to admit, your acting was superb. And your patience. To make me believe it all, Grandpa even told me the secrets of the ritual. But in the end, luck was on my side. Maybe it's like you said, Grandpa. Maybe I really am protected by the family's fortune. 11, that last sentence was the killing blow. All three of them looked like ghosts. Uncle Rick even managed to point a trembling finger at Grandpa. It's your fault, you old fool. You're the one who got sloppy. Watching them turn on each other, I felt nothing. Looking back, I was terrified of how close they'd come. If I hadn't been out digging peanuts with Dad that day, right after the rain had stopped, I never would have noticed the ladder tracks in the soft mud. The tracks didn't match our ladder, and no one in our family would need a ladder to get into our own backyard. That was the first red flag. And if I hadn't walked in to find Grandpa acting strangely, snooping around the main house, I never would have thought to buy those security cameras from Amazon. And they would never have exposed themselves like fools, performing for my hidden audience. They want to play a long con with me, so I played one right back. The truth is, I never fully trusted Grandpa. The first time was when he said, "In this family, I decide who thrives and who fails." The second was when he reminded me to clip my fingernails. How could anyone be stupid enough to completely trust a man that ruthless? From that day on, neither my dad nor I ever clipped our fingernails at home. He didn't understand why, but he trusted me completely. If any single one of those things had gone differently, I would be the one lying on the floor right now. But there was no need to explain any of this to them. Seeing their confusion and agony brought me a strange sense of satisfaction. Caleb was lost in despair, his eyes vacant. "But how did you get our fingernails?" he mumbled. That was one question I was happy to answer. I leaned down and whispered in his ear, "Remember that night you and your dad got jumped on the road? That was me, and there's nothing you can do about it." Caleb's eyes went wide, then they rolled back in his head, and he passed out. It was finally over. I wasn't going to harm them, of course. I dropped a still-breathing Uncle Rick and Caleb on their doorstep. Aunt Brenda took care of them for a few days before running off with a man from out of town. They were still family, after all, so I stepped in, paid to have them admitted to a long-term care facility, and made sure they would be well looked after. With his newly siphoned years, Grandpa had no problem living to be 100. He even got interviewed by a local TV station. It was a big deal. But no one visited him anymore. No one asked how he was doing. If any new health problems arose, well, we do what we could. As for whether all this would affect the family's fortune, I didn't care about that as much as I used to. Grandpa was an old man, after all. And I learned that once a business reaches a certain size, it's not fortune you rely on, but connections and shared interests. And I happen to be a generous man who is very good at making friends. Not long after, we held the party for my daughter's first birthday. That morning, my wife dressed our daughter in an adorable little dress, her face glowing with happiness. My wife is a city girl through and through. We have our cultural gaps, and she rarely asks about my family's strange dramas. She scoffs at the very idea of siphoning years, and I never bring it up. After she was done getting the baby ready, I carefully clipped my daughter's tiny fingernails and placed them in a small, sealed envelope. What are you doing with those? Throw them out, that's disgusting. It's her first time getting her nails clipped. Of course, we have to keep them as a memento. You're so weird. My wife laughed and playfully punched my arm. I just smiled. You never know when they might come in handy.